The debate had barely begun. Mike Pence, standing tall at the podium, his face a mask of calculated certainty, unleashed his first jab. "America is a land of freedom," he said, voice booming, "and those who threaten our values, our way of life, must be stopped." A chill swept through the room. The crowd was waiting. Waiting for Kamala Harris. And then she stood. Calm. Collected. Eyes steady, unwavering. The silence was thick, the air practically crackling with tension. She approached the microphone, her hands resting lightly on the podium, as if she had all the time in the world. Pence smirked, anticipating the usual political sparring. But Harris wasn't here for the usual. She was here to make history. "What you fail to understand, Mike," she began, her voice smooth but cutting through the room like a razor, "is that America's greatness doesn't lie in division. It's in its ability to lift everyone up, regardless of their background, their skin, or their status." The room fell deathly silent. Every eye was on her. Every ear waiting for the next words, the next move in this game of political chess. Harris continued, her words like slow poison, "And it's not the people demanding justice who are threatening this country. It's people like you, who hide behind empty rhetoric and the same tired excuses, that are failing us. You've spent your career trying to tear down what America was supposed to be." The room held its breath. The stunned silence was deafening. Pence's face tightened. His smirk disappeared. The tension between the two figures, the very embodiment of America's ideological divide, was palpable. For a moment, it looked like time itself had stopped. And then, as the weight of Harris's words sank in, the room erupted, whispers, gasps, eyes wide with disbelief. What happened next would be etched in history. The stage was set for more than just another political showdown. The stakes were higher than anyone realized. This wasn't just about policy, or politics, it was about the soul of America. The audience in the debate hall, the millions watching across the country, knew it. They felt it. The two candidates standing before them weren't just vying for votes, they were representing the very heart of America's future. Mike Pence, conservative, unyielding, a stalwart of the old guard, stood for the status quo. His rhetoric was predictable, even stale, but it resonated with millions who feared change. He'd built his career on division, on us versus them, framing every issue as a battle between the so-called patriots and the outsiders. He'd leveraged fear, played on insecurities, and pushed a narrative of strength, one that ignored the struggles of those outside his carefully curated circle. And then there was Kamala Harris. Born of immigrant parents, her life was a testament to the American dream. Her journey was a story of resilience, of overcoming barriers, racial, social, and political, to rise to the highest echelons of power. She had always been the calm in the storm, the one who didn't just fight for justice but fought for the future. For all of America, not just those with the loudest voices or the deepest pockets. She stood for unity, equality, and a more inclusive future, and that vision had earned her the ire of her opponents. But now, standing on that stage, under the glaring lights and the weight of the moment, it wasn't just about her ideals. It wasn't just about proving who was right or wrong. It was about the America she and millions of others were fighting for, the America that was still healing, still grappling with its deep divisions, and still struggling to live up to its promises. Pence's words had barely settled when Harris struck, cutting through the rhetoric with precision. She was no longer simply a candidate. She was the embodiment of the voices that had been silenced for too long, the marginalized, the overlooked, the forgotten. And Pence, with his air of certainty, his polished phrases, couldn't even see the ground shifting beneath his feet. He was losing ground faster than he could comprehend. The debate had turned. Kamala Harris wasn't just playing defense anymore. She was taking the fight to him, head-on, unapologetically. And the room was with her. Every person watching, every face in the crowd, felt it in their bones. This wasn't just a debate. It was the very fabric of the country being torn apart and reassembled in front of their eyes. What Pence didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that Harris had already made the calculation. She wasn't here to win votes with platitudes, she was here to change the narrative. Pence's hollow arguments, his insistence on preserving a world that didn't work for most, were now just smoke and mirrors. It was the old order versus the new. As the debate intensified, the world held its breath. The cameras zoomed in on Pence, his jaw tightening, his smirk slipping, his words faltering. It was clear now, he was out of his depth. And the audience knew it. What Kamala Harris would say next would change everything, and Pence had no idea what was coming. The next moment was crucial. One misstep, one misquote, and Harris could lose her chance. But if she landed the right blow, if she stayed focused, if she stayed true to the vision she'd carried her entire life, then everything would shift. The entire nation would feel it. And they would never look at their choices the same way again. The tension in the room was palpable. What was at stake here wasn't just a victory for one candidate, it was a defining moment for the very values that America claimed to stand for. And everyone, in that room and watching at home, knew that history was being written in real time. For years, Mike Pence had been the picture of political polish, the clean-cut, ever-so-careful politician who knew exactly what to say and when to say it. He had climbed through the ranks of Indiana politics with a demeanor that screamed trustworthy, yet beneath that surface lay a different story. Pence wasn't just a conservative figurehead, he was a master of presenting a carefully curated image of righteousness and patriotism, all while skating dangerously close to the edge of reality. And over time, that polished image became his greatest asset, even though it concealed a track record marred by contradictions, distortions, and a disturbing indifference to the truth. It wasn't always this way. Once, Mike Pence was the fresh-faced congressman from Indiana, a man who prided himself on his traditional values and his devotion to God, country, and family. To the conservative base, he was a hero, someone who spoke their language, who didn't shy away from challenging what he saw as the moral decline of the nation. In those early years, he was known for delivering impassioned speeches in Congress about the sanctity of life and the dangers of government overreach. He quickly rose to prominence, drawing attention not just for his beliefs, but for his insistence that he was an embodiment of moral clarity in a world that had gone astray. But as his career progressed, so too did his arrogance. Pence's political ideology began to morph into something more dangerous, more divisive. His fervent embrace of religious conservatism transformed into a kind of weaponized moral superiority. It wasn't enough for Pence to espouse his views, he needed everyone else to adopt them as well. And if they didn't? He was more than happy to vilify them, to frame anyone who didn't agree with him as a threat to the fabric of the nation. He played on fears, fear of immigrants, fear of the changing demographic, fear of anyone who didn't look or think like him. His stance on immigration alone made him a divisive figure, dismissing the very people who had helped build the country. America First became his rallying cry, but for many, it felt like a code for exclusion. For Pence, this wasn't just political strategy, it was a worldview. And yet, for all his talk of strength and morality, it became increasingly clear that his so-called values were just a thin veil over something much darker. Pence's greatest flaw, however, wasn't his policy, it was his arrogance. He became so wrapped up in his self-righteousness that he stopped listening. He stopped considering other perspectives, stopped engaging with facts that contradicted his beliefs. The truth became secondary to what he wanted to believe, and to what he thought would advance his agenda. In the political game, this kind of arrogance was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it earned him a loyal base that admired his unyielding stance. On the other, it made him a target for those who saw through the thin layer of rhetoric. But it was his blind commitment to ideology that made him an increasingly dangerous figure. For years, Pence had relied on half-truths, misleading statements, and his ability to dodge uncomfortable questions. His mantra was simple: avoid the tough discussions, deflect when necessary, and repeat the talking points that would keep his supporters loyal. He was the ultimate salesman of his own narrative, willing to twist facts and erase history to create a version of America that existed only in his mind. His debates were a perfect example of this. Pence wasn't interested in engaging with the truth as it was, he was interested in dominating the conversation. He deflected blame, he relied on emotional appeals, and he avoided any real confrontation with uncomfortable facts. For him, reality was something that could be shaped, manipulated, and contorted to fit his needs. Whether it was his denial of climate change or his downplaying of systemic inequality, Pence's refusal to acknowledge facts that didn't align with his worldview made him a dangerous force in American politics. It was this arrogance, this inflated sense of self-righteousness, that set the stage for his fall. Throughout his career, Pence had managed to sidestep real scrutiny, avoiding any true reckoning with his record. He relied on the media's tendency to grant him the benefit of the doubt, leaning into his reputation as a family values politician, as if that was enough to wash away the contradictions in his policies. But what Pence didn't realize was that the room was shifting. His arguments were losing traction, and the cracks in his facade were beginning to show. He was too confident in his ability to talk his way out of anything. But as Kamala Harris had just proven, his polished rhetoric couldn't stand up to the scrutiny of the truth. She didn't just call him out, she exposed the very foundation of his arguments as weak and rooted in nothing but personal arrogance. For all his careful planning and tightly controlled narratives, Mike Pence had never prepared for the kind of moment that was unfolding before him. His arrogance had blinded him to the reality that Kamala Harris, with her focus on justice, truth, and inclusivity, wasn't going to let him get away with his usual half-truths. Today, it would all come crashing down. Kamala Harris had always known what it meant to fight. To be seen as other, to have to prove her worth every step of the way. Born to immigrant parents in Oakland, California, she was no stranger to adversity. Her mother, a cancer researcher from India, and her father, a Jamaican economist, had raised her with the belief that the pursuit of justice wasn't just a profession, it was a duty. In their eyes, every setback was an opportunity to rise higher, and every challenge was a chance to rewrite the story that was handed to you. Her childhood had been marked by differences. In the 1960s and 70s, Kamala's family didn't always fit neatly into the boxes society had created. She was the child of two worlds, Indian and Jamaican, each rich in culture and history, but both struggling to find their place in the broader American narrative. Her classmates didn't always know where to place her. Some called her exotic, others other. But she had learned early on that in a world that tried to put labels on her, the only way forward was to chart her own course. Her mother taught her not to shrink herself for anyone, not to apologize for being ambitious, or for wanting more, not just for herself, but for everyone. And so Kamala, even at a young age, became accustomed to standing out, to fighting for space in rooms where she wasn't always welcome, and to questioning everything she was told. That was where her story began, not in the hallowed halls of political power, but in the grit of everyday struggle. In her teenage years, Kamala had witnessed the power of activism firsthand, watching as her community rallied together to demand better schools, better services, and a fairer chance at success. She saw how change was often born not from the top down, but from the bottom up, from the everyday people who refused to be ignored. She'd carried that spirit with her when she went off to Howard University, a historically black university in Washington, D.C. It was there that Kamala found her voice. It wasn't just about earning a degree, it was about learning to fight for the underrepresented, to push against the systems that tried to keep people like her down. At Howard, Kamala wasn't just a student, she was a part of a movement, alongside others who shared her belief in justice and equality. It was in the classrooms, on the steps of the campus, and in the bustling halls of the university that Kamala first recognized the deep connection between education and empowerment. And from there, she carried that knowledge into law school at the University of California, Hastings College of the Law. Kamala wasn't the kind of person who simply followed the rules. She was the one who challenged them. As a prosecutor in San Francisco, she had faced the tough realities of the criminal justice system, where power often went unchecked and the voices of the marginalized were ignored. But Kamala didn't shy away from that fight. She leaned into it. She became known for her toughness, her keen intellect, and her ability to navigate the gray areas of the law while never compromising on her values. Her rise was fast, but it wasn't without struggle. She took on the establishment, the powerful, and the corrupt, and she won. But Kamala's strength wasn't just in her ability to prosecute or her brilliance in the courtroom, it was in her unshakable belief in people. In a world that often felt like it was designed to break people down, Kamala's guiding principle had always been that everyone, regardless of where they came from, deserved the chance to stand up, to be heard, and to have a shot at justice. It was in her time as California's Attorney General that Kamala truly began to make a name for herself nationally. While her tenure wasn't without controversy, it was undeniable that she was unafraid to take on the most powerful interests in the state, whether it was big banks, powerful corporations, or law enforcement agencies. Her work to reform the criminal justice system, to tackle the opioid crisis, and to fight for affordable healthcare had made her a force to be reckoned with. But she wasn't just taking on the status quo, she was redefining what it meant to fight for justice. Her approach was always methodical, calm, calculated, never losing sight of the bigger picture, no matter how personal the fight became. She knew the emotional weight of every decision she made. In her heart, she carried the stories of every person who had ever been dismissed, ignored, or oppressed. And when the time came for her to run for the U.S. Senate, Kamala did so with a fierce sense of purpose. She wasn't just running for office, she was running to represent the millions of people who had been left out of the conversation, the ones who had never had a seat at the table. It was this sense of duty, this deep connection to the communities she represented, that set Kamala apart from so many others in the political arena. While others scrambled for power or tried to mold themselves into whatever their party wanted them to be, Kamala remained steadfast. She spoke from the heart. She spoke with clarity and truth. And above all, she spoke with the knowledge that her fight wasn't just for a policy or a law, it was for the future of a nation that had always promised opportunity but had far too often failed to deliver it. In that debate, as Mike Pence stood there, rattling off empty platitudes, Kamala's calm demeanor and unflinching confidence gave her an edge no one else could replicate. She didn't need to shout to make a point. For years, she had fought for justice, holding power to account, exposing corruption, and standing firm in the face of adversity. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She knew that this debate wasn't just a test of her political acumen. It was a test of everything she stood for, the values of equality, fairness, and truth. She wasn't just there to win a debate. She was there to win for the people, to show the world what it meant to have the courage to fight for what's right, no matter the cost. And that's exactly what she was about to do. The room felt heavier with every passing moment. What had started as a carefully controlled exchange was beginning to show cracks. Mike Pence, usually so poised, had started to lose his edge. The calm, measured tone he had relied on so far was beginning to slip, replaced with a barely contained frustration that was becoming harder to mask. His responses came faster now, sharper, he was no longer thinking before he spoke, and everyone could see it. America has always been a beacon of freedom, Pence asserted, his voice rising, and we will not let anyone threaten that, not now, not ever. We are strong because we protect our values. Kamala Harris's response came without hesitation. It's easy to claim you're protecting values when the very values you uphold harm so many Americans. You talk about strength, Mike, but you've done nothing to strengthen our communities. Nothing to fight for the vulnerable, the marginalized, the ones who've been denied opportunity. Your vision isn't America's vision. Her voice was calm, but there was an undeniable edge to her words. Each sentence was calculated, aimed precisely at the weaknesses in Pence's rhetoric. She wasn't just arguing against his points, she was dismantling them, one piece at a time. And with every word she spoke, Pence's composure cracked a little more. The room was watching closely now, their eyes flicking back and forth between the two figures, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Harris had hit him, and hit him hard. Pence's face tightened as he fired back, but there was a flicker of doubt behind his eyes. He knew she was right, but he couldn't let himself acknowledge it. Not in front of the nation. You don't understand what it takes to protect this country, Pence snapped, his tone now defensive. The policies we've put in place have kept us safe. You can't deny that. Kamala Harris raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a small, knowing smile. Safe? Or have we just become numb to the inequalities that plague our communities? You speak of safety, Mike, but how safe are we when millions of Americans, immigrants, Black Americans, people of color, are being denied their basic rights? Her words cut through him like a blade. He faltered, his mouth opening and closing, searching for something to say. But nothing came. He wanted to fight back, to challenge her narrative, but he knew she was right. Deep down, he knew the system he was defending had failed those who needed it most. He could feel the audience's eyes on him, could hear the slightest shift in the air, the collective realization that his argument was falling apart. Your silence speaks volumes, Mike, Harris continued, her voice steady, unwavering. You can keep pretending that your policies are working, but the truth is, they aren't. The people who've been ignored, who've been left out, they see it, and they know it. You can't hide behind fear-mongering anymore. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Harris wasn't just speaking to Pence, she was speaking to them. She was bringing the debate back to the heart of the matter, the inequality, the systemic failures, the people who had been forgotten. It was clear now that she wasn't going to let Pence's rhetoric slide. She was going to hold him accountable. Pence's jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed, and for a brief second, the mask of calm that he'd worked so hard to maintain faltered. He shifted on his feet, clearly agitated. You can't just accuse me of ignoring problems without offering any real solutions, Kamala. That's easy for you to say. But Harris wasn't backing down. It's not about offering solutions to a system that doesn't work, Mike. It's about tearing down the structures that need to be rebuilt, because they're broken. You can't just slap a band-aid on a broken system and call it a cure. That's the problem with your thinking. For a split second, the room seemed to hold its breath. Pence's face had turned a deep shade of red, his composure finally slipping. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words were gone. There was nothing left to say. The cracks were showing, and everyone could see them. Harris had him on the ropes, and she wasn't letting go. The tension in the room was palpable. Pence's responses were becoming more erratic, more defensive, while Harris stood her ground, unwavering. Her calm demeanor was starting to feel like a force of nature, one that Pence couldn't control. And it was clear that the audience was beginning to shift. The moment of truth was approaching, and it was only a matter of time before Harris landed the final blow. As Pence floundered for words, Harris locked eyes with him. Her gaze was unflinching, her voice a steady reminder of everything he had failed to address. You've spent your entire career pretending that your version of America works for everyone. But we're living in a different reality now, Mike. A reality where people are demanding more than just promises. They're demanding action. And your time is up. The room was silent. Even the most ardent supporters of Pence could feel the tide turning. Kamala Harris wasn't just debating him, she was breaking him down, piece by piece. The countdown to the devastating counterattack had begun. It was almost time for her to make her move. The tension in the room was unbearable now, a palpable weight hanging in the air. Every eye was on Kamala Harris, waiting for her to strike. Pence had been flailing, trying to salvage his argument, but the cracks were clear. His defense of his policies, his brand of America First, was starting to fall apart. He had no more talking points to hide behind, no more distractions to deflect the weight of her accusations. Kamala Harris had him exactly where she wanted him. The room was silent, every person holding their breath, waiting for the moment when the floor would drop out from under Pence. His hands were shaking slightly as he gripped the podium, his voice faltering. Kamala could see the panic in his eyes. He knew he was losing, and the longer this dragged on, the more it was clear he had no idea how to win this fight. His carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. Pence tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. What you fail to understand, Kamala, is that we're in a battle for our very survival. These aren't just policies, they are the foundation of America's strength. Your approach is reckless. It's dangerous. Kamala Harris didn't flinch. She didn't look rattled in the least. In fact, she seemed almost serene, as though everything she had set up to this point was just preparation for this very moment. She tilted her head slightly, the tiniest of smiles on her lips as she studied Pence, the opponent who had been so sure of himself just moments ago. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice calm but cutting, each word landing with surgical precision. Mike, you've spent this entire debate telling us that your vision of America is the only one that matters. That your idea of strength, your values, are the only things that will protect us. But let me ask you something, who exactly are you protecting? Because it's certainly not the millions of Americans who are struggling to survive. You talk about freedom, but how can anyone be free when they can't even afford to live their lives without fear? The room shifted, murmurs running through the crowd, but Kamala didn't pause. She wasn't done yet. She had only just begun. You talk about protecting America, she continued, her voice gaining momentum, but what you're really protecting is a system that has been failing people for decades. A system that prioritizes the wealthy, that criminalizes poverty, that locks out communities of color from opportunity. Your so-called America First policies have left behind the very people who built this country, immigrants, workers, people who have fought for the freedom you claim to defend. You don't get to rewrite history, Mike. You don't get to pretend that the reality we're living in isn't happening. Her words hung in the air like thunderclaps. Every word she spoke, every accusation, every pointed challenge, cut through the layers of Pence's defense. Kamala Harris wasn't just dismantling his argument, she was exposing him for what he truly was, a man who cared more about his image, more about the powerful elite he represented, than the actual people he was supposed to serve. Your policies have always been about preserving power, Kamala continued, her tone unwavering. And when you claim to be the protector of this nation, you forget one very simple thing. America is not just a land of the powerful few. America is the land of the people. The workers, the dreamers, the mothers, the fathers, the immigrants who came here with nothing but the hope of a better future. You stand here, pretending that your vision of America, one built on exclusion, on fear, on division, has any place in our future. But the truth is, Mike, the future isn't yours to control anymore. It's ours. The room was absolutely still now. Kamala's words were like fire, and they were slowly consuming Pence's defenses. She wasn't just pointing out his flaws, she was showing the world exactly who he was and what he represented. A man who spoke of values, but whose actions told a very different story. You want to talk about strength, Mike? Kamala asked, leaning in slightly, her voice soft but piercing. True strength isn't in making people afraid of each other. It's in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Even when the people you're fighting for aren't the ones in power, but the ones who need your help the most. Real strength comes from lifting people up, not tearing them down. She paused for a beat, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. The silence in the room was deafening, and for the first time that night, Pence's gaze wavered. It wasn't just that he was losing the debate, he was losing the very essence of what he had always believed to be true. Your entire campaign, your entire platform, she continued, her voice gaining strength, has been built on a lie. A lie that says some people deserve more than others. That some people are worth more, that some lives matter more. And that's not just wrong, Mike, it's un-American. It's not the America we were promised. It's not the America that's going to move us forward. And you know that, deep down. You know you're on the wrong side of history. The room was electric now, the energy palpable, as if everyone could feel the gravity of the moment. The world was watching, and Kamala Harris had just shattered the narrative that Mike Pence had been desperately clinging to. It was as if the very foundation of his argument had crumbled in real time, and he stood there, speechless, unable to respond. Kamala took a step back, her eyes still fixed on Pence. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't needed to. She had dismantled him with nothing but the truth, with facts that no amount of denial could erase. The crowd shifted in their seats, the silence now replaced with an almost collective breath being held. Kamala had done what few others had the courage, or the skill, to do. She had taken Pence's arrogance, his empty rhetoric, and torn it apart. And in doing so, she had delivered a final blow that was heard across the nation. "You don't get to rewrite history, Mike," she said one last time, her voice calm but resolute. "Facts are facts, and your argument is just a distraction." The room went silent. Pence stood there, frozen, his mouth opening and closing in disbelief. He had no response. There was nothing left to say. And in that moment, Kamala Harris had won. Not just the debate, but a victory for truth, for justice, and for the people who had been silenced for far too long. The moment Kamala Harris dropped the mic, the world felt it. Within seconds, the debate hall buzzed with a new energy, one that would carry the weight of her words far beyond that room. As her final line echoed in the air, the political landscape began to shift. Social media erupted. Phones in hand, thousands of viewers who had watched the moment unfold began to flood the internet with their reactions. It wasn't just the usual post-debate chatter, it was a tidal wave. Within minutes, hashtags like #KamalaWins and #PenceDestroyed started trending worldwide. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, every platform was alive with the electric pulse of excitement and disbelief. Celebrities, commentators, and ordinary people alike were all in unison, their voices ringing out in a chorus of validation for the woman who had taken down one of the most powerful political figures in America with nothing but the truth. Did anyone just see what Kamala Harris did to Pence? #KamalaWinsFire, one tweet read, accompanied by a viral clip of her mic drop moment. Another tweet quickly followed. Pence didn't even know how to respond. He was silenced. #PenceDestroyed #TruthWins. Within minutes, memes flooded the internet, some showcasing a stunned Pence, others highlighting Harris's cool, calm demeanor as she obliterated his narrative. One meme featured Harris's unflinching gaze overlaid with the text, "When you've got the truth, no rebuttal needed." The internet was on fire, a wildfire of support for Harris and disdain for Pence, whose carefully cultivated image had just been shattered in front of millions. The ripple effects of the debate stretched far beyond the social media landscape. Political commentators across the spectrum weighed in, their voices resonating in ways they hadn't before. The usual punditry, which often teetered on the edge of neutrality, now found themselves embracing a shared sense of awe at Harris's ability to cut through Pence's empty rhetoric. "I've never seen a more complete dismantling of an argument in real time," said one political analyst on a live stream. Kamala Harris didn't just win that debate, she won the moment. She took the moral high ground and made sure Pence knew it. A video clip from the debate, showing Harris's final rebuttal, was shared on every platform imaginable. It went viral so quickly, the momentum was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the media or influencers reacting, it was everyone. From high school students to CEOs, from activists to stay-at-home parents, people were talking about the debate. Kamala's mic drop moment became more than just a viral video, it became a statement. The victory was symbolic, a metaphor for the fight against the political status quo. As the hashtags continued to trend, the world was waking up to the power of truth and resilience in the face of hollow political gamesmanship. Even celebrities, many of whom had remained on the sidelines during the election cycle, took to social media to voice their admiration. A-list actors, musicians, and sports figures tweeted their support for Harris, some even calling it one of the most impressive political takedowns in modern history. The applause was deafening. Meanwhile, Pence's response to the barrage of praise for Harris was nowhere to be found. His social media accounts, usually so full of partisan cheerleaders, were eerily silent. For someone who had spent his career navigating the intricacies of public relations, his absence spoke volumes. His supporters, once vocal and unyielding, seemed to retreat into the shadows, unable to offer a solid defense. His credibility had taken a massive hit, and it was clear that, for the first time in his career, he was struggling to maintain the upper hand. As the night wore on, the ripple effects of Harris's victory continued to spread. News outlets picked up the story, reporting on the fallout with increasing intensity. Kamala Harris silences Mike Pence in historic debate moment, one headline read. Another read, Pence's faltering performance leaves him speechless after Harris's mic drop moment. Politicians from both sides of the aisle weighed in. Democratic leaders praised Harris's composure and strategic brilliance, while Republicans, who had once stood firmly behind Pence, were less enthusiastic. "I don't know how he's going to recover from this," one Republican strategist told a news outlet. "He couldn't even come up with a decent rebuttal. That's not just a loss for him, it's a loss for the entire conservative movement." Meanwhile, across the aisle, Harris's victory wasn't just a talking point, it became a rallying cry. The grassroots activists who had supported her from the beginning saw the moment as the culmination of years of struggle. Her words had transcended the debate, they were a validation of everything they had been fighting for. They saw her not just as a politician, but as a symbol of the change they had long hoped for. People from communities that had been marginalized for so long now felt like their voices had been amplified, that their struggles were being heard on the national stage. And it wasn't just about politics. For many, it was personal. The shockwaves of the debate reached far beyond the political realm and deep into the hearts of ordinary people. They saw in Kamala Harris's composure and clarity the kind of leadership they had always longed for, someone who didn't need to yell, who didn't need to belittle her opponents, but who could simply stand and speak the truth, and let the truth speak for itself. Her victory was a victory for justice, for the marginalized, for the millions who had been left behind. It was a statement that truth had the power to topple the mighty, that integrity could break the chains of corruption. And as Harris's name trended all over the world, her supporters felt something they hadn't in a long time, hope. For Pence, it wasn't just the loss of the debate, it was the unraveling of the carefully constructed political empire he had spent years building. The moment Kamala Harris had exposed his contradictions, his arrogance, and his refusal to address the real issues, Pence's grip on the narrative slipped away. And there was no getting it back. As the world watched, Kamala Harris's mic drop moment became the stuff of legend. It was a defining moment not just in that debate, but in the larger fight for the future of the country. One side had fought with rhetoric, division, and fear. The other fought with truth, compassion, and a commitment to justice. And in the end, truth had won. In the wake of the historic debate, the ripple effects weren't just political, they were moral. Kamala Harris's victory wasn't just a win on the stage, it was a victory for every single person who had ever been silenced, dismissed, or ignored. It wasn't about winning a debate, it was about something much larger. It was about truth, dignity, and integrity overcoming manipulation and lies. It was about proving that, no matter how powerful or polished the opponent, the truth would always shine through in the end. As Harris's final words hung in the air, the moment carried with it a weight that far exceeded anything that had come before. It wasn't just the fact that she had dismantled Mike Pence's argument with such grace and precision, it was the deeper message behind it. The message that, in a world where fear-mongering and distortion of facts were so often used as tools of control, truth was the most powerful weapon of all. "I'm not here to tear anyone down," Harris had said in that moment. "I'm here to lift everyone up. To fight for the people who've been left behind." Those words had landed with such force that they had reverberated far beyond the debate stage. They were the kind of words that sparked a fire, a flame of hope that spread across the nation. They reminded us that politics wasn't just about winning arguments, it was about standing up for the right thing, even when the stakes were high. And for Kamala Harris, the stakes were personal. Her entire life had been shaped by the belief that justice wasn't just an ideal, it was a responsibility. From her work as a prosecutor, where she fought for fairness, to her time as California's Attorney General, where she took on the powerful and the corrupt, Harris had always known that the fight for justice was often a lonely one. But what she had also known was that the more difficult the fight, the more necessary it became. In that debate, Kamala didn't just represent herself. She represented every person who had ever been told that their voice didn't matter. She represented the millions of people who, for so long, had been told they were invisible, unimportant, unworthy of the promises this country had made. And when she spoke that night, she spoke not just for the people in the room, but for the people across America who were tired of being ignored. Her victory wasn't just about exposing Pence's weaknesses, it was about lifting the veil on a system that had long rewarded the powerful while turning a blind eye to the struggles of the people who needed help the most. She had shown that the truth was a force that no amount of manipulation could overcome, that no amount of lies could obscure. Kamala's message was clear: no matter how uncomfortable the truth may be, it always prevails in the end. She had done more than just defeat Mike Pence in that moment. She had reminded the world of what mattered most: integrity, dignity, the ability to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. And that was a lesson for everyone, politician or not. It was a reminder that truth isn't just a political strategy. It's the foundation upon which justice is built. The truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to resort to fear or division. It simply needs to be spoken. And when it is, everything else falls into place. Kamala's victory became a beacon for those who had long fought in the shadows. It was a rallying cry for the truth seekers, the justice warriors, and the dreamers who believed that a better world was possible. And it wasn't just about politics. It was about human decency, the fundamental belief that every person deserves to be treated with respect and fairness. That every voice, no matter how small or quiet, deserves to be heard. The debate had shown that one person, standing firm in their beliefs, could shift the course of a nation. It had shown that you didn't have to compromise your principles to succeed, you just had to remain true to them. Kamala Harris's mic drop moment wasn't just a victory for her, it was a victory for truth. A victory for the people who had been silenced. A victory for the millions of Americans who had been told that their hopes and dreams didn't matter. In that moment, Harris had proven that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, always prevails. And as the world watched the aftermath unfold, there was one undeniable truth that had emerged from it all: Kamala Harris had not only won the debate, she had inspired a movement. A movement that was built on integrity, on truth, and on the unwavering belief that justice always finds a way. In the end, Kamala Harris had done more than just defeat Mike Pence. She had reminded us all of what really mattered, that when we fight for truth, when we stand up for what is right, we are all stronger. She had shown that dignity and justice are the pillars that this nation was built upon, and with those values at the forefront, the future was in good hands. The battle for truth is far from over. Kamala Harris's victory in that debate wasn't just a moment, it was a turning point. A moment that proved that integrity, dignity, and the courage to stand up for what's right are the foundations upon which real change is built. And now, it's our turn to carry that message forward. This fight isn't about one person or one moment, it's about all of us. It's about the millions of voices that have been ignored, the struggles that have been overlooked, and the systems that need to be torn down and rebuilt for a better, more just America. Kamala Harris showed us what's possible when we stand firm in our beliefs, when we refuse to let lies and manipulation go unchecked. But this is just the beginning. The truth, the values that make us stronger, need to be shared. It's up to you to take this victory and spread it, to make sure this story doesn't fade into the background. Share this moment, share this message, and let's make sure that the fight for justice doesn't stop here. We've seen what happens when people stand up for what's right, when they refuse to be silenced. Now, it's time for all of us to do the same. Let's hold those in power accountable, let's speak truth to power, and let's ensure that integrity and justice are the driving forces in every corner of our society. So, if you believe in truth, in justice, and in making this country a place where every voice is heard, hit that subscribe button, share this video with your friends, and be part of the movement. Together, we are unstoppable. Together, we can shape a future that reflects the values we fight for. Let's make sure that moments like this shape our future.